Hello everybody and welcome to another review and gameplay demo for Pathogenesis. Before I get started, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages as well as my Patreon page. On all of those, you'll be able to interact with myself and my channel in a whole bunch of really cool ways. Now, I mentioned this is another review of this game. I originally got Pathogenesis from the creators, and now they have sent me a copy of the update 2.0 essentially. It's added some new stuff and tweaked especially the end game to make it a little bit more friendly, a little bit more competitive, and less swingy. So I wanted to go over it and tell you guys what's changed, what I like, what I don't like, all the good usual stuff. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Pathogenesis itself is a deck building game where everybody is playing as pathogens who are attacking the human body. You have to break down the barriers, fight against the immune system, and essentially do as much damage as possible. Whoever does the most damage wins. This is a game that plays 1 to 4 people. It's aged 14 or up, you'll see why in just a little bit, and it takes about a half hour to an hour to play. It has wonderful replayability, and the theme comes through in a massive, massive way. Not to mention the art for this game is absolutely gorgeous. But before I really get into it, we're going to go ahead and go over what this game is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are 2 major ones I wanted to mention. The first one being legendary. Whether it's Marvel, Predator, whatever it happens to be, the idea is that you have a deck builder where you're combating a common foe. Now, in Pathogenesis, you have the option of playing fully cooperative, but even if you're playing competitively, you guys are still attacking the same tracts of the body. You're attacking the gastrointestinal, the tissue, whatever it happens to be, and you're collectively breaking it down, with the idea being that you're buying new cards to strengthen your pathogens so that you can do more damage and hopefully survive the incoming immune response. And that's the general idea behind it. The second similarity that I wanted to mention is more thematic, which is Plague Incorporated. This started off as an app / computer game, what have you, where essentially you are playing as a pathogen of some sort and you are trying to infect the entire planet. Again, making yourself evolve so that you can transmit yourself better, you become less deadly, but at the same time you can be transmitted more effortlessly, all of that kind of stuff, with the idea being that you are playing as the quote bad guy. Pandemic the Cure, I believe, did something relatively similar to this, but the idea being that you are on the other side of the coin. So that said, Marvel Legendary for the purpose of mechanics in terms of it's a deck builder where you're fighting against common foe, and then Plague Incorporated and other games like it in terms of the thematic aspect where you are playing as the virus, playing as the bad thing, and trying to attack what is normally good. Now, it's almost time for my little demo for this particular game, but before I get started with it, I will say I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. Whereas normally I go through and I show you guys a few rounds of gameplay and how to do it, instead what I'll be doing today is primarily focusing on the updates. I will be giving you guys a brief overview of the game and how exactly it works, but mostly I'll be showing you the changes to it. If you'd like to see the full-fledged gameplay demo, you can see my original video linked in the description below, but with that, let's go ahead and show you guys what the updates are to Pathogenesis. I'm not going to be focusing too much on the full-fledged gameplay for this, but rather focusing mostly on the upgrades that happen for the 2.0 version. If you would like to see a more in-depth version of this video where I go through the individual phases and exactly how they work, you can take a look at the card posted here in the corner, or you can look at the link in the description below for my previous video on the initial Kickstarter release. So in this particular case, we have this set up for 3 players, and what I'll do is I'll go over just a basic overview of the game itself, how it generally functions, and then go more in depth into the changes that have been made with the 2.0 version. So essentially we got 3 people here. Everybody starts off with their starter decks of cards. This is a deck builder, so everybody gets their starter cards, and also a turn order / symbology information card. And whoever is not going first will receive these genetic tokens, and these are essentially buy power. These allow you to get the new cards. Now, the theme of this game, as I've mentioned, is we are pathogens attacking the human body. So what we need to do is we will be playing our pathogens, modifying them with different toxins and capabilities, and modifying the environments in which they are, and all sorts of other cool stuff. And then we will be attacking the barriers that are blocking us from entering the body. Once we are able to enter the body, the immune system will start attacking us, but we will be able to deplete down the body track itself. So like I mentioned, this particular game is set up for 3 people with a quick play. There's a lot of different options for setup though. You've got competitive, cooperative, team-based, all sorts of other things. But right now we are on competitive with 3 people. So you can see here everybody has their starter cards. We've got the tracks set up with the tokens inside and the barrier cards ready to go. We have the pathogens that are specific for the individual tracks, which have matching colors and symbols on the sides. So for example, here with the respiratory, you see this blue symbol that indicates that it's respiratory, not to mention the fact that it says it's respiratory. We also have these guys, which are the multi-point pathogens, and these are cool. They're more expensive. They cost 5 instead of 4, but these can attack anything, so they're a lot more versatile in that sense. We also have our deck set up down here. These are our general components that we'll be able to purchase throughout the game. We've got our fever cards, and then we have our immune system cards. Now, the way that the immune system cards work is we've got 1 dot right here, which starts face down, and then we have the 2 dot cards here, which are face up. So these represent the innate and the adaptive immune system response respectively, and effectively as we draw these cards, we'll put them face up over here. Once we reshuffle everything, we'll go through the deck one more time, the entire thing. After that's done, the game is over. So in general, the game takes place over 5 phases. First, we buy in, we play our cards, and then we do what's called the preemptive attack, the immune response, the attack by the pathogens, and then the cleanup phase. During the first few rounds of the game, the immune system is not active, so the preemptive attack and the immune response do not occur. Essentially, during the phase 1, where you buy in, you play cards, you draw 5 cards from your shuffled deck, and then you look at your genetic buy power, which is the symbol with the little DNA. And what you're doing is you're trying to purchase new cards. You can buy new pathogens, or you can buy pathogen modifiers. The way the modifiers work is very, very simple. For example, we can look at mycolic acid right here, and this is a purple modifier. In this particular case, it has a purple symbol on the side, which means it can go to any type of pathogen. So what you would do is during the play phase, you would take one of your pathogens, play it down, and then you would take in any of your purchases after it's been discarded and reshuffled and came back through, and then you would just connect them together like that. In this case, for the mycolic acid, it would just look like that. And in this case, the initial ones you have only have 2 connections, but as you get the bigger and badder parasites or pathogens, then you get more connections that you're capable of, and they also get a stronger innate attack and defense. The attack and defense are indicated by the triangles and the shields on the cards respectively. And effectively, the way they work is very simple. In this case, having my mycolic acid, we start off with a 0 attack on my pathogen, and so we add 1 attack. So now I have 1 attack. Start off with 2 defense, add 3, so that's a total of 5 defense. Very, very simple stuff. The other major types of cards that we've got, we have the environment cards. The environment cards are unique because you just play them however they say. In this case, play on a pathogen for the medical implants, and this will give you the preemptive ability. So the preemptive ability is really important for the immune system. Initially, we're going to be building up our pathogens, building up the strength of our deck, and attacking these barrier cards. Each of the individual tracks has barriers that we have to fight through. And essentially, if we meet or beat this during the attack phase, and we say, I am attacking the tissue in this particular example, and we beat it, then this goes away, the next one flips over, right? And we keep going until 1 track has been completely eliminated, or 1 set of barrier cards. After that, then the immune system starts to respond. The person who defeated the last barrier card, at the beginning of their next turn, we start off with the preemptive attack and the immune response. The way that that works is the preemptive attack, if you have this little pyramid made up of the cubes, you attack first. When you start attacking something with no more barriers, you start getting these little victory chips. This is what you count at the end of the game to see who wins. The actual immune response, the way it works is you take cards face down and put them next to each pathogen that you have in play. So if this is what it looks like, I would just do that, flip these both over, and then see what happens. Some of these cards will be adding specific tokens to your cards. For example, the C3 complement pathway, different types of antibodies, all sorts of different stuff. After that's resolved, we would take both of these and put them face up in the pile that includes the adaptive immune cards. Once again, after we go through all of this, we will take our collective pile here, shuffle it up, and then we have a new draw deck where after these are done, they go away from the game, and after that's done, the game is over and we count up to see who wins. So that's pretty much it as far as the general idea of what's going on. We also have some minor things like the fever cards, which generally just clog your hand up because fever is trying to kill off pathogens, but you can deliberately buy them because some cards actually become stronger when you have more fever cards in your hand at the present time. So with that, let's go over the expansion, or rather the 2.0 version here, and see what has changed. The biggest change is that we have this new track. We have the genitourinary track. And so it acts the same as the rest of them. It has its own set of barrier cards. In this case, we're looking at lactobacillus, urine, and I think that's pretty much it for the barriers that we've got. But we fight through it the same as we always do. We've got our chips. In this case, these are not productions, so keep in mind these are going to change to look similar to these with the 3 and the 1 and the 2 value, or the 3 and the 1 values. The other big change that we got in terms of cards is that we got some of these that are very specific for the genitourinary tract infections. So for example, this one, we've got pox. We have a new mechanic that was added here called collateral damage. And the way that this works is whenever you have a pathogen that has something attached by collateral damage, so in this case it would have to be attached like this because it requires 2 spots. So for example, it would look like this. Then if the pathogen survives the immune system attack, then you would take that immune system card's attack and add it to your next one as well. So it essentially becomes far more powerful. And in this case, pox, if you're not familiar, chicken pox, for example, is also known as shingles, or more commonly known as shingles, especially in the elderly, and it can be a very devastating disease that paralyzes part of the face. Very nasty stuff. And that's sort of the idea, is that it's collateral damage against the body. There are some adaptive immune cards that do the same thing, or even the mostly adaptive immune, where you have the cytotoxic T cells. So cytotoxic T cells will destroy things as well, one automatic damage being done to the body, right? So that is the major new mechanic, is the collateral damage. The other big thing that was changed with this update is essentially tweaking the adaptive immune response. Whereas before, it was relatively common for one person to get an attack 10 by getting the unlucky draw of the T cells, the helper T cells here, which have an attack of 10, and then other people got no attack whatsoever. So it was really frustrating. But now, essentially what ended up happening is there's a lot more attack capability, especially on the adaptive immune cards, and on top of that, there are a lot more that are drawn to these specific markers. So you have things like the IgE, the IgA, the IgM, the C3, the complement pathway, all that kind of stuff. On that note, the other major change that we had is right here in this hand, I have one of the old markers for C3, and here I've got one of the new markers. So you notice on one side these are the same, but then on the other side, the new ones, if you have this attached to your pathogen, if it's been attacked by the complement pathway, then the immune response will have a +1 attack, no matter what, even if it's not actually using the C3. The IgE values will also have those too. So here, this is the old IgE, you notice it's blank on both sides, but then the IgE from the new one will have the attack value that is added for the immune system. Right. IgM, same thing. I don't have one of the old ones handy, but in this case it adds 2 attack. So essentially the upgrades just do a great job of balancing out some of the endgame wild swings that we ended up with regard to having your pathogens grow and then die very suddenly, whereas other people just grew and grew and grew and essentially became invincible because they got lucky on the draws on all this stuff. But with that, that's pretty much it for the major updates as well as the general review of how the game functions as a whole. Like I said, if you'd like to see more in-depth detail about some of the cards, how they interact and connect and all that kind of thing, feel free to check out my other video. But again, there's a lot going on, especially in this giant deck of the cell components right here, where we've got toxins, environments, all that kind of thing. But they all get added in the exact same way, where they have just the specific markers that show what type they can be added to. Purples can be added to anything, and essentially you just have the environment cards that do whatever they particularly say. There's Poor Diet, one of my personal favorites. But with that, thank you so much for watching my quick little review, my quick little demo for the new stuff with Pathogenesis. We're going to get right into my pros and cons as well as general conclusions. Pros and cons for Pathogenesis. My first pro is the replayability. I love the fact that we have this big table of all different ways to start setting up this game. We've got competitive, cooperative, team, solo, we've got quick, we've got normal, we've got hard, we've got all sorts of different ways that you can set it up. So you have a tremendous amount of replayability in a relatively small box. And you can really tweak the experience to your exact liking, especially with the ones where you only use 3 of the 4 tracks. That means that you can really adjust which ones that you want to use, how they can interact with each other, and all that kind of thing. Next up on the pro list is the art for this game. You guys know thematically I'm a huge science nerd. I love seeing it in games. And the scientific art in this game in particular is truly incredible. It was done by somebody named Somersault 1824, who is actually very famous in the scientific community for artistic illustrations of scientific things, whether it's molecules or cells or anything along those lines, all of these different pathways. And so the art really makes the theme come alive for me, and it's absolutely gorgeous. That said, it can be a little bit busy at times, but for me personally, I really love it and think that it did a wonderful job of getting it all together and making it look wonderful, like it's straight out of a textbook essentially. Next up on the pros is we're talking about the update, so let's talk about the update. The update really did some great things. One of the original cons that I had for this game was I wish that they had more tracks so that we could have additional barriers that we could try to break down and all that kind of thing. And boom, what do we see? Genitourinary. If I'm not mistaken, this was actually one that I specifically mentioned they should have because STIs. But that is neither here nor there. I'm really glad that they added it. It adds more versatility to the game. It adds more versatility to the cards, strategies, all of that kind of thing. Another pro, moving right into it, is strategy. You've got different strategies that you can employ. Where do you go for multiple tracks simultaneously? Do you really focus on one and really try to get all of the cards that you can so that you can build up the strongest specific pathogens that you can and just try to empty it out and end the game as quickly as possible? Or do you just try to nip and bud at various times and just get as much as you can from the various ones while sort of trying to fly under the radar? Like the replayability aspect with the different ways to set it up, same thing in terms of the different strategic options that you can have. Next up, in terms of the update, another big pro for me is the way that they modify the adaptive immune cards especially. Before, we had the big wild swings of person A gets no attack, person B gets an attack 10, and then person C gets like an attack 3 towards the end of the game. It's absolutely ridiculous and it's tremendously frustrating, but adding in the additional attack to the different antibodies as well as improving the text and the wording and the balance on the ending cards makes the game a lot more playable and a lot more fun, and you can plan for things a little bit better at least. Not to mention you don't see somebody rocketing forward relatively suddenly just because they happen to get a relatively lucky draw. Last but certainly not least on my pros, or the one that is just a pro, I should say, is mechanics. So in general, this is a good deck building game. If you just take a look at it strictly from that sense, you have a lot of options in this game. I like that you have permanent options out in terms of you can always buy the different pathogens to get them into your deck. They allow you additional buy power, not to mention the ability to put them down and really start building up solid pathogens. But then you also always have sort of the bank that you can purchase from that's constantly being replenished. And again, just strictly mechanically speaking, it is a well-balanced, reasonably fun, and it's a game where you don't have a whole lot of AP, which is not super common with deck builders as it is, but still it's something that's worth mentioning. Last but not least on my pro list is also my first con, and that is the theme. I mentioned this earlier in terms of the art, where it is that I love the game's theme. I actually did really bad when I took immunology as a student, but it was something that always intrigued me. And the fact is that the authors of this game really went above and beyond in terms of making certain that the science was as accurate as possible in terms of all the different pathways, how all the cells behave, how we get in, what the barriers are, and balancing it all together in a sensible way that makes sense for a game specifically. But that said, it's also a con in the sense of if you don't like the theme, it's going to be really difficult to like this game. I mentioned that the mechanics themselves are good. It is a good deck builder game, but the theme is, it's higher than most other scientific games that I have. So I've got other games like Cytosis and Ion and Covalent from Genius Games, a company that I really like in terms of the balance that they strike. This one is closer to something like Pathogenesis, where it's just overwhelmed with theme, but this one is not quite overwhelmed. It's close though, in terms of you have a lot of things that sound kind of jargony, and if you just put it to where you've got the tokens that match the words, then it's like, it works well enough, but it can be really difficult to get drawn into the game properly if you don't truly appreciate the theme. Next up on the con list is the age limit. So particularly with the idea of adding genitourinary and having cards like unprotected sex, it makes it essentially impossible to play this as a family game if you are using the new update. Even if you're using the previous game, just the general release, it can be really tough because it's not inherently a violent game, but you are talking about pathogens eating through your body. And there are some cards that are kind of inappropriate. You have things like smoking, which is part of why it had to have the higher age limit and things along those lines. So it can be difficult to treat as a family game, not to mention the complexity. But again, worker placements, deck builders, all that kind of thing, they tend to not be as family friendly just in terms of complexity. But in this case, the theme makes it a lot less family friendly than it otherwise could be, which is kind of unfortunate. But that said, those were the main ones that I had to say, so on to the general conclusions. Fact is, I like Pathogenesis. I would really border on saying I really love it. It's a great game. I love the theme, solid deck building mechanics. It's a little bit complex. There's a lot of symbology with it that can take some getting used to, but once you're used to it, it plays very smoothly. You have relatively little analysis paralysis. You have a very clear path to victory in terms of you're collecting victory chips, and so you know this is what I need to win and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy it. My gaming group generally enjoys it. Fans of deck builders, I recommend it. Fans of scientific themed games, I recommend it. Do try out the 2.0. You can check out the link to the Kickstarter below whenever it launches, and it'll be launching early October, by the way, incidentally. And with that, thank you very, very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed my second review of Pathogenesis, and I will see you next time.